what's next now? From the moment Goshen is able to discover a plot like in Nyanyuki or a plot like by the coastband, by the mountain, what's the next stage?
So we go about scouting. So we've identified a general area, right? Based on our criteria. We spend a lot of time scouting. That generally happens to be 30% of my daily tasks.
Your JD.
Yes, my job description. I spend a lot of time scouting. I love the process of scouting. I get to discover new parts of the country I never saw before. I get to learn things about our history, the communities that live in those particular areas. It's a fun process for us, so it's easy. But that's what you'd have to do. You know, a lot of people who may not have time to do that because they have a permanent vocation somewhere, they're employed. You know, I, in essence, get paid to scout. That's part of the business. For someone who doesn't have that opportunity, they rely on companies like us to sort of point them in the right direction. Whether it's companies like us that only sell what we own, because unlike agents and or brokers, we never act as a third party for any transaction.
Why don't you do that? Why don't you broker land on behalf of the owner of the land?
It just it doesn't feel right. You know, in Kenya is famous for land fraud. I'll put it that way. And a lot of that is perpetrated by parties that have no real interest in the transaction. And by real, I mean they don't own the land and they're not the one risking the money.
Okay.
So the middlemen in between have been very problematic. And the primary reason for that, in my humble opinion, is that it's an unregulated market. We don't have laws governing land brokerage or agency. You know, I had someone's house help the other day trying to broker a multi-million-dollar transaction. And I'm like, what on earth does he know about the risks involved for the seller or the buyer? They're simply looking for a payday in between, and that's been very problematic. And we just didn't want the association at all. We didn't want to risk our customers' investments by sort of midwifing a transaction, getting paid a commission. We move on and then they have issues later because we had no visibility on the history of ownership, how it was produced. Was it grabbed from public land? Was it stolen from someone? Are there succession issues behind that? We just didn't want any of that. So we made a decision pretty early that we would only sell what we owned ourselves because we can back up the ownership documents.
Oh, okay. Let's now then let's stick to this whole scouting.
Yes.
Because that's what you say is like your 30% of your JD.
Yes.
At Goshen Acquisitions and Grand Acres.
Yeah.
So let me take one of the properties that I know you have, Nyanyuki. What do you go and look for? Well, let's use Imbuko. Because that sounds like, even where on earth is it? Right. It almost sounds like that. Like
I saw a wine bottle on a shelf recently, and it said Imbuko, and I was so excited. I thought it was, it was made in Kenya, but it's a South African wine. There's a place in South Africa apparently also called Imbuko.
Yeah.
But the Imbuko we're referring to is in southern Kajiado County, towards the Amboseli ecosystem, about 40 to 50 kilometers before. That's an important thing to mention because a lot of people hear us say South Kajiado, they immediately assume that we're selling grab land from Amboseli, which sadly happens from time to time, or within the feeder corridors that have very tight restrictions. We're not in that zone, but we are on that corridor from Emali town, which is about 124 kilometers from Nairobi, specifically from Nyayo Stadium roundabout, down Mombasa Road to Emali, 124.
It's less than 3 hours, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to get to Emali from Nyayo Stadium.
Okay.
And then we branch down towards Oloitoktok, New Tarmac Road, about 33 kilometers down. So that's southern Kajiado. There specifically, again, this is some of the unplanned ways you discover places. We bought some land from a Maasai gentleman, Mzee Daniel Oletapasian, from Konza. He was a native of Konza, Kajiado side of Konza, because Konza is shared by two main counties, Kajiado and Makueni. Makueni, in some areas, Machakos also has a claim. But he's on the Konza side, which is Kajiado. Kajiado side, rather, which is Maasai. And he sold us some land. We finished the transaction. He was so happy because apparently he had several aborted sales before we came along. And because of that, his family heard that he had concluded the transaction, painlessly. And therefore, would your buyer want to buy ours also from Imbuko? And so he pestered us for 3 months to go and see and buy. Eventually, I reluctantly agreed to, just out of respect for the old man. And I went to take a look. I fell in love with the place immediately. I'd never been to that side of the country.
Okay. When you say you fell in love, what did you fall in love with? Because I'm sure this is part of the scouting.
Yes. So the distance happened to be, 2.5 hours for driving, which it didn't feel like far. That's important. If you get tired going to the place, might be an indication it'll be a problem for you to manage.
Okay.
Accessibility is important. So it was a 2.5 hour drive, very scenic, especially when you turn off of Mombasa Road. You have wide open landscapes. I can see into Tanzania, 100 kilometers away from there. I mean, that was stunning. Coming from, the congestion of Nairobi, it felt like a decompression. And there was something about that I found very therapeutic and beautiful. And so when we finally got to the site, Mount Kilimanjaro was fully exposed in all of her glory. And that Mount Kilimanjaro is famous for being a very shy mountain, because I suppose of its imminence as the tallest freestanding mountain on the planet.
On the planet?
Yeah, it's the tallest freestanding mountain in the world.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
It tends to have a lot of cloud cover. And it's a natural consequence of how tall it is, the water catchment activities and so on. But on this particular day, it was out in the open, and I had never seen that, ever. I mean, I'd seen posters and paintings. I think every household in Kenya has a painting of Mount Kilimanjaro hanging on a wall. But that was stunning. It took me aback, and I immediately knew I wanted a piece of that.
Okay.
And so that's how we discovered Imbuko. Was nowhere in our peripheral.
I'm sure
never
you didn't
heard
even
of
know
the place.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, I'd never been to that side of the country. I'd never been to the Amboseli National Park, so I never had any reason to be on that side of the country. My mom is from Central Kitui, which we access through Thika. My dad is from Western Kenya, in Webuye. So I know tons of places along those corridors, but I had never been to this part of the country. So in that instance, I sort of accidentally discovered Imbuko and fell in love with the place.
I've got to ask this, because what you mentioned is huge and maybe a restriction as to why people don't even invest in Kenya. You are investing out of your own, let me use the word, tribe. Without fear of consequences.
Yes. I'm only now realizing how debilitating this fear is for Kenyans. I mean, I grew up in Nairobi, very cosmopolitan. I went to school in the States, lived in the US for 11 years. US is famous for being a melting pot of all manner of cultures. So I don't have a lot of the baggage that many Kenyans have around investing outside of their ethnic zones. And I didn't understand that until recently. I mean, I do understand we have ethnicity issues, tribalism and blah, blah, blah. Post-election violence that happened in Kenya scarred a lot of Kenyans and created a lot of fear about investing outside of your ancestral zones. But I've only just now begun to come to terms with how many Kenyans are affected psychologically by that. So for us, it's never been an issue. And so I feel like because of that, we tend to discover new zones faster than people. Most people do. And I wish that would change, honestly. I believe it will over time. The Constitution now from 2010 guarantees every Kenyan the right to invest anywhere in the country.
I love that.
Regardless of their ethnicity or ancestral origins. And people need to know that. But I guess subsequently, that's a need we're serving, where when we released our first offering in Imbuko, people who had never been there, like I hadn't been there 10 years before, were now discovering the place because they'd never had a reason to go there.
I get it.
And so I think that's an important psychological adjustment people have to make. If you're going to invest and be savvy about investing and get in on the ground floor, as it were, so that you can build wealth in the maximum possible way, you have to remove those shackles from your mind. It's
so
a
basically,
mindset.
when you're saying getting at the ground floor, you said get it for the cheapest that
Absolutely.
it will ever be.
Yes, I always say make money when you buy, not when you sell.
Explain that.
Right, and it basically means in general, the first way to do that is you buy below market value. And there are several ways to buy below market value. You buy from a distressed seller. Distressed sellers are people who are going through some form of crisis and urgently need money, and they have decided to sell off the asset at whatever price they can get now, as opposed to waiting.
I love that.
So therefore they can sell at a discount.
The person who called you to Imbuko was distressed.
In a manner of speaking, yes. Yeah. They needed money for school fees. I believe, as is common in the Maasai culture, he was ready to marry another wife and needed to buy cattle for bride price. Also wanted to buy more cattle for himself. The Maasai community have a very different value system, as it were, and it's very culture specific. Yep. They're a very communal community, which I love about them. I don't understand some of the reasons and the rationale for how they deal with their assets, because other communities value land more than gold even, and would never sell. Whereas there's certain instances where a Maasai will sell land because whatever they want to take care of is more important to them. And there are certain universal situations that make all of us motivated. A sick family member, mounting hospital bills, school fees is one of those. And so that makes you a motivated seller, and you're willing to take slightly less than the market value because you can do it now as opposed to waiting to do it later.
Okay.
So that's the first way you make money when you buy. You buy it at a discount, because when you're done buying, it's more valuable than what you paid. Right?
Even if you had to sell it immediately that you bought it, you can sell it for.
You could sell it for more, as opposed to having to wait for the value to go up. The other way to buy, to make money when you buy, is to be strategic. You buy like we did in Konza, near the Konza Techno City development. 13 months later, the then President Mwai Kibaki broke ground. And all of a sudden, everyone and their grandmother was hunting for land around Konza for obvious reasons. And we were able to sell for a significantly higher price than we had bought just 13 months prior, right? Had we waited for the normal trajectory, we might have waited 10 years, 5 years, at the least, for the valuations to get up there. But because of that significant nationally televised event, very well branded, part of the Vision 2030 sort of agenda, its value suddenly went up because more people wanted it than there were selling. So that's another way to make money when you buy, not when you sell necessarily, because you can generally project its higher value in a short-term basis
get it, yep.
than what you're paying now. Another great way to make money when you buy is to add value immediately. And this is what companies like us do. We tend to do a combination of all those things, including buying
quantity.
Quantity.
Yeah. The more quantity you also buy,
the lower the price per acre.
You have more bargaining power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I'm buying 100 acres, I can be a bit more aggressive on the price because of the quantum of capital that's being exchanged than if I was just buying a 1 acre or 5 acre block. On top of that, I add value immediately.
And when you talk about adding value, you're talking about roads. Give us example. What do you mean?
So basic infrastructure, that's a prime area of focus for us in improving or creating accessibility. Right, so road surface that is all weather, for instance, is important. Before, we simply used to clear the pathways to allow vehicles to move through the land, but in the rainy seasons in certain parts of the country that's impossible because it's too muddy. So therefore, what else do you do to make sure that you can use the road in the thickest of or the heaviest of the rainy season? Right, so marraming the roads, doing clear boundary demarcations, also master planning your subdivision, as it turns out, has value. Instead of just chopping a piece of land into squares and rectangles, planning their layout using a professional planner and even an architect in a way that is pleasing to the eventual users and owners in terms of circulating and having public areas and shared spaces, that tends to add value. It makes it a lot more desirable. So these are some of the ways we add value ourselves.
But in the process of trying to add value, you will lose out on land. For example, if I buy a 100 parcel and I'm going to add value through adding roads, through calling some areas communal, that automatically means I don't have 100 plots to sell. Yes. I'll probably only have 70 or 80. Is this something that you've gone through, and is the addition in terms of the value add, does it make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you a live example. In Imbuko, for instance, we're currently selling 1 acre plots. These were subdivided from an 88 acre block, right? We have 80 subdivisions, because 2 of them are 2 acres instead of 1 for the public utilities. So if, let's assume those 2 were also separate titles, basically we would have 82 1 acre plots out of 88 acres. And that's because of all the areas that went towards the road access. So in general, you're looking at about 10% going to accessibility. If you give enough width and space for the roads, and for expansion in the future, if you give up space for utilities and public use for the compound, that can go up to 12, even 15% at the highest. So yes, you lose some, but in general, how we treat that is whatever value we have lost to public access for the benefit of the others, we subdivide equally amongst the others. So the value doesn't disappear. It just simply makes the others slightly more expensive because you're transferring value there, because what you have given up is to create accessibility and optimal use for them anyway. So, you know, issues of giving up land should not matter. In actual fact, creating the accessibility and public utility makes what you have subdivided a lot more valuable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a simple example for adding value.
I love it. I love the jumping that we're doing, because you're definitely dropping a lot of. You're taking us class as we have the conversation.
If someone wants to get in the business of land development,
which I didn't even expect the conversation to go into, but that's wonderful. So you've scouted. You've decided this is. Whoa! I didn't see this land. I didn't think a land like this existed. I want. Now you press the button on I want.
Right.
What's the next stage? So how basically I'm asking, how do I start then?